The tourist, who had come out to Uluru on his own to do some hiking, had been found. Well, his body had, and some portions of it seemed to be missing. It appeared that some dingoes had found his body before the police had. It had been 8 days since David Brett, a man from England, had gone missing out at Ayers Rock, or Uluru, one of Australia's most famous tourist attractions. The officers were searching around the area to see if they could find any bones that the local wildlife might have carried off. David had fallen in an area that had a couple dingo layers around it, and the police wanted to make sure that they could find everything that they could of David to send back home. While looking over the area, one officer caught a glimpse of some fabric half buried in the red desert sand. So he went over and pulled it out of the sand, and what he was holding instantly brought back memories from years before, where, across the country, the sentence, "A dingo ate my baby," was on all the news media stations and all over the front pages. And they knew they needed to get this piece of evidence to the proper authorities as soon as possible.
Hand put on the actual jumpsuit. Lindy has always said there was a matinee jacket on, and so obviously if there was a matinee jacket on, you couldn't put a blood-stained hand direct from the throat onto the jumpsuit.
Hey guys, just quickly before we start here, I've got a podcast now, so you can listen to the videos on whichever app you like the best. It's called The Kelso Show. It was late on the night of August 16th, 1980, when Lindy Chamberlain and her husband Michael pulled into Ayers Rock Campground. The 3-day trip from their home back into Mount Isa had been pretty smooth, and now Lindy was ready for some camping and exploring around Ayers Rock with her husband and 3 little children, Adrian, age 6, Reagan, age 4, and new baby Azaria, just 10 weeks old. After a good night's rest in their tent, the family, they set out for a little hike. While Michael and the boys, they climbed around on the rocks, Lindy, carrying baby Azaria in her arms, went to check out a rock formation called the Fertility Cave. But when she was leaving the cave, she looked up, and just a short distance away, staring at her and little baby Azaria, was a dingo. That in later interviews, Lindy would say she felt as if the wild dog was casing the baby. After the hike was done, the family headed back to the campgrounds and began to get dinner ready. Michael and Lindy chatted with another couple who were staying near them while they barbecued up some food, Sally and Greg Lowe. It was a little while after sunset that Lindy told Michael that she was going to go put down Azaria to sleep in the tent beside her brother Reagan, who had already went to bed earlier. Only about 10 minutes had gone by since Lindy had returned from where she had left Azaria in the tent, when a cry rang out in the night that sent Lindy running back towards the family tent as fast as she could. And it was only a few short moments after that another cry that became infamous in Australia and around the world rang out. "A dingo's got my baby." Now, quite quickly, a large search was put on with around 300 people. They formed a human line and they searched the brush surrounding the campgrounds, but this turned up nothing. The first investigator on scene, a man by the name of Frank Morris, wrote that when he first examined the Chamberlain's tent, he found blood on one of the rugs in the tent, and that he also saw paw prints leading away from the tent, but that they disappeared once they hit a paved road, and that was all anybody had to go on. Besides that, there was no other evidence showing what could have happened to little Azaria. It wouldn't be until about a week later when a wildflower photographer named Wally Goodwin was out taking pictures near the area that Azaria had gone missing, when he was walking along and happened to spot some torn up fabric, which turned out to be Azaria's baby jumpsuit Now, as soon as the media got a hold of this story, people began to speculate that Lindy wasn't so innocent in all of this. And in fact, she must have murdered her baby and been using this whole Dingo story as a cover up. Some newspapers were even claiming that she had done it as some sort of religious sacrifice. And people were claiming that because they didn't think the demeanor that the Chamberlains had in their interviews matched what they thought grieving parents should act like. So therefore, Lindy must have been the killer. But even though public opinion seemed to be against them, Dennis Barrett, the magistrate and coroner of Alice Springs, which is a town in the Northern Territory of Australia where the story takes place, well, he didn't believe that Lindy was even remotely capable of hurting her own baby, and with no evidence actually pointing to Lindy, in February 1981, he concluded, after the first inquest into Azaria's death, that yes, Azaria was indeed taken and killed by a dingo from the tent, and that both parents had nothing to do with her untimely death. Well, the prosecutors and people who were hell-bent on proving Lindy guilty, they didn't like his conclusions at all. So, they kept investigating Lindy and even searched their home, the Chamberlain home, seizing up to 300 personal belongings, including their car that they had driven to Uluru. And in that car, investigators would find what they claimed to be a large pattern of blood splatter on the dashboard, specifically fetal blood, which is blood that contains certain biological characteristics that would show that this blood it could have only come from a newborn baby. Also, evidence was brought forth from multiple experts saying that they believed that Azaria's jumpsuit was actually cut with a sharp object, and that the fibers they were too uniformly cut to be caused by the teeth of a dingo, implying that Lindy had actually cut her own baby's throat before disposing the body. So, on September 13th, 1982, a second inquest began with the prosecution stating that they knew Lindy had murdered Azaria in the family car with a pair of scissors and that she was a liar and a baby killer. But Sally Lowe claimed that on the night of Azaria's disappearance, that Lindy had been away from the campfire for only 5, maybe 6 minutes, and that she had herself heard the baby cry, quite a serious cry, a cry that had been abruptly cut off. She also mentioned how Lindy had this sort of new mom glow about her, and that she seemed to be acting normally. Another woman, Judy West, testified that she had heard Lindy cry out, "A dingo's got my baby," just minutes after hearing a long, low growl coming from the direction of the tent Azaria was in. Judy also claims that just an hour or so earlier, she had actually had to shoot at a dingo that had grabbed her 12-year-old daughter by the arm and was about to drag her away. Now, things weren't looking good for the prosecution, but one witness, they did say that just minutes after the alleged dingo attack, Michael Chamberlain, he had shown up at her door and very calmly said, "Dingo has taken our baby, and she is most likely dead by now." And that Lindy told her, "Whatever happens, it's God will." Also, with a pretty calm and straightforward demeanor. Now, this is what actually turned public opinion against the Chamberlains, and specifically Lindy, besides whatever evidence that the prosecution had. People thought they were just way too calm and nonchalant about their baby disappearing. They thought that Lindy and Michael, or any parent who lost a child, would be, in shambles and unable to function normally. And, well, I mean, those people, they aren't exactly wrong, you know. So to them, to the public, their lack of emotions, it was basically a sign of guilt from the two of them. It was after a series of so-called forensic experts took the stand that not only did the public opinion turn against Lindy, but so did the juries. A biologist named Andrew Scott testified that the tests that he ran showed that the blood found on Azaria's jumpsuit and the way that it was patterned meant it must have flown down from a single point made by some sort of sharp cutting instrument. Another biologist named Joy Cool claimed that the tests that she ran on the blood found on the dashboard of the Chamberlain's car conclusively showed that it was the blood of an infant. But suspiciously, she had destroyed all of her results, claiming that to be a common practice. Okay. While James Cameron, a professor of forensic medicine, he testified that Azaria was killed by a cutting instrument across the neck or around the neck held by a human. He then showed some slides of Azaria's clothing taken in his laboratory with ultraviolet light, which he believed showed the pattern of bloody fingerprints to the jury. When Michael Chamberlain took the stand, Ian Barker, part of the prosecution, questioned him about his actions right after his daughter disappeared, questioning why he hadn't run off into the bush in search of Azaria. Was it because he already knew what his wife had done? Michael weakly said, "No, Mr. Barker," with a lot of the observers in the court claiming that his testimony seemed like it lacked conviction. It was on October 29th, around 8:30 in the morning, when the foreman of the jury stepped forward to read the verdict. The jury had found Lindy guilty of murder, the murder of her daughter Azaria, and found Michael to be an accessory to the fact. Lindy got life in prison, while the judge suspended Michael's sentence for the time being, reasoning that I consider it not only appropriate, but in the interests of justice to do so, he explained. It was a month later, while serving her sentence at Berrima Prison in Darwin, that Lindy gave birth to her second daughter, Kalia. She was released on bail, but the happiness it was short-lived because after two appeals, one in 1983 to the federal court and one in 1984 to Australia's High Court, were rejected, the first 3-0 and the second 3-2, Lindy found herself back in prison, with the majority of the country thinking that she was a baby killer. Around 52% of the population was thinking that she was guilty. But Lindy, she did also have some support as well. The Chamberlain Innocence Committee was founded in hopes of raising public support for a new inquiry, and some of the evidence that had been given by the prosecution was now being called into question and looking a little bit fishy, especially the evidence of the blood that was apparently found inside the Chamberlain's car. It turned out not to be blood at all, but a type of sound deadening spray that was used by all car manufacturers. But sadly for now, Lindy stuck in prison. It wasn't until January of 1986 when the police were out searching for David Brett, a man who had gone hiking 8 days earlier and disappeared. The police, they stumbled across what looked like a tiny white jacket, by now covered in dirt so that it looked brown. It turned out to be Azaria's missing baby jacket, and the piece of evidence that would set Lindy free.
Lindy Chamberlain has been released from Darwin jail and she won't be going back. At the same time, the Northern Territory government has announced there'll be a new inquiry into the Chamberlain case. Today's dramatic developments end a week of intense police activity at Ayers Rock after the uncovering of new evidence there. The Northern Territory's government has acted on the advice of its Solicitor General and its Police Commissioner. 5.5 years after the death of her daughter Azaria, Lindy Chamberlain is free. And the Territory's Attorney General says she'll remain free no matter what the outcome of the new inquiry is.
With this new evidence found, and the already shaky evidence provided by the prosecution to begin with, the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory at the time ordered the immediate release of Lindy on February 7th, 1986, and a brand new inquiry was launched. It took all the way up until September 15th, 1988, for that new inquiry to finally remove all convictions from Lindy Chamberlain. And when the verdict was finally reached, the Chamberlains held a victory feast with all their supporters, with a lawyer named Ken Crispin saying how amazed he was that the Chamberlains, they weren't holding any bitterness or self-pity. Though the third inquiry, it didn't conclude that a dingo had killed Azaria. It left the cause of death as unknown, which still fueled some people into thinking that Lindy was guilty still. It took all the way up until February of 2012, after a fourth and final inquest fully exonerated Lindy publicly, with Coroner Elizabeth Morris stating, "The evidence is sufficiently adequate, clear, cogent, and exact to exclude all other reasonable probabilities than that a dingo entered the tent where Lindy and Michael Chamberlain's young child lay, resting on that August night 32 years ago." In the end of it all, the Chamberlains, they were awarded $1.3 million for wrongful imprisonment, but that was only about a third of their entire legal costs, and it didn't do anything about the years of social isolation and verbal abuse that they had to endure. And just having people think that you're capable of murdering your child, it ruined many, many relationships for Lindy and Michael, including their own. And this case really shows you what can happen when the media gets a hold of a story and starts spouting out things that aren't true. It can massively sway public opinion all the way up to the so-called experts and even judges. Lindy and Michael, they separated in 1992, but they did remain in each other's lives until Michael Chamberlain passed away at the age of 72 in 2017 due to complications of leukemia. Lindy Chamberlain Crichton, as she goes by now, is still alive to this day, and hopefully many more. I'm sorry they didn't believe you, Lindy. Anyways, that's all for this one. Sort of a short one here. I hope you enjoyed, and have a good one.